All right, so I think we'll get started. And good morning, everyone. Official welcomes and thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Margaret Chapman. I'm COO and partner at Narrative Research, which is a market research company based here in Halifax. And I volunteer with the Halifax Chamber of Commerce. I'm outgoing chair of the board. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's Navigating COVID-19 webinar series on change management. As we all know, our organizations are going through a lot of change as we embrace our new world and begin to reopen the economy. It's important for organizations to understand how to manage change and to quickly align around new ways of doing things in response to opportunities or threats. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our guest speaker this morning. Harriet Schumacher is CEO of Big Leap Leadership, Inc. Harriet is here with us today to speak about what it might mean for organizations to embrace and manage change as a competitive advantage. A certified executive coach and leadership development expert, Harriet has a wealth of experience working with diverse organizations across various industries, including healthcare, financial services, professional services, utilities, construction, retail, and government. Harriet has a strong focus on developing evidence-based and practical solutions that drive tangible organizational impact. So thank you so much for joining us this morning, Harriet. I'll turn it over to you.
Lovely, Margaret. Thank you so much and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for gifting me with your time and attention for this conversation that we're going to host today about change. Lots of change that we have all been going through and continue to keep going through, and I'm happy to host this conversation with you today. And so as you arrive in the chat, I would love for you to just settle in, make sure that you have a pen and a piece of paper. We are going to be doing an exercise today, so hopefully you have something to take notes with. And I'm happy to see some of the responses that are coming into the chat already. So tell me, as we're getting started here, there's a lot of things to talk about, negative aspects of this change that has happened as a result of COVID-19. I thought we might start on a positive foot. I know I could use a little energy and momentum this morning. So why don't you pop into the chat and tell me what's something positive in your life, or even within your business, or as a leader, what's something that's been a positive aspect of this current COVID-19 experience for you? Has there been any silver lining, if you will, in relation to, hey, you started doing yoga again, excellent. So simplify. Yes, there are some definitely more simple aspects to how we're living our lives. A lot of things were taken away. I'm seeing lots of people spending more time with their pets. My dog, Maeve, is she here right now? Usually she's at my feet when I'm facilitating, but she's not here right now. She has been my guiding light. Okay, pivoting your business. I'd love to learn more about that. Yes, I'm in the same boat. So getting to work home alone. Yes, educating the children. We can no longer leave that to someone else. It is fully in our hands. And I was just sharing with Margaret and Sandra that my children are, I have two daughters. They're in the other room. And maybe about 15 minutes prior to me logging on, their worlds erupted. So there's a lot of emotional upheaval going on down the hallway right now. So if you're hearing screaming in the background of this webinar today, this is real life, right? This is what it's like to run a business and to be hosting conversations like this online. So you may get to hear some of my reality showing up in the other rooms there. So, beautiful reflection time. What's really important in life? Yeah, I love that. Gained a lot of experience. Yeah, from a leadership perspective, we've really had an opportunity to really dig in and step into a new way of leading. And so I'm happy to see that. I'm loving all these comments. Thank you so much. So, there's lots of positive things that we can harvest from this experience. And I really want to build on this positive momentum today and also give us an opportunity. I'm also a realist, right? So, we can't just throw sunshine on the reality of the situation that we're currently experiencing. There are a lot of challenges as well, right? And so I want to just, consider the current situation that we're in, and that's what we're here to really talk about today. What changes, when you think about this COVID-19 situation, what changes have been done to you or happened to you as a result of this current pandemic? So please type your responses to this question in the chat below. What are some of the changes which have been done to you as a result of this? What are things which feel like they've been done to you that you haven't really had a lot of control over? And then I want you to think about how does that make you feel when change is done to you, when it's not something that you have necessarily chosen. What does it feel like to be in that space? What words come to mind when you think about that? Right. So having to shut down your business, that's not something that you chose to do, right? Yep. So different priorities. Yep. Yeah, not having help with childcare or not having the help and the support that we used to have. Absolutely. So, wearing so many hats, I think that's especially true for a lot of us who are now taking on multiple roles and trying to juggle all of those things at once. So, 100% technology dependence. Yeah, for me, it's been like sitting a lot. I haven't felt as active as I used to be, going to meetings and going out of the house. And income. Yeah, absolutely. The aspects of that are very true, right? So, change done to us. I want you to think about that. Now, what changes did you really initiate yourself? Were there any changes done by you as a result of this current pandemic? Anything that you have created yourself as a result of this? So the distinction between change done to us, things where we feel like we're maybe powerless or out of control in that situation, versus changes that we have initiated or change that has been done by us. Okay, Patty has laid herself off. She's like, I'm out. So now, what do you feel when you think about change done to you versus change done by you? What do you notice different from an emotional standpoint? Okay, cool. Started doing like work, I couldn't go to the gym. So I took matters into my own hands and found a way. Yeah, transitioned to online classes beautifully. Yep, wonderful. I want you to just reflect on the difference here because what we're going to be talking about quite a bit today are some of the psychological aspects of change, and I'm going to show you some models and some other things as well. But this tends to be the hardest part, right? The hardest part is the emotional side of change. And when we look at the distinction between change done to us versus change done by us, as we reflect, more often than not, change done to us feels forced, right? And that our hands were forced into a situation which we felt very much out of control. And while we will comply, in most of those situations, whether it's a COVID situation or other types of change that's done to us, we're usually not very enthusiastic in that process, right? We tend to be kind of dragging our heels and it can bring up a lot of emotions. And so, and when possible, we'll be happy to revert to our old habits, our own behaviors. And a lot of people are saying, I just want to go back to the way things were before. I think we need to recognize that there's that we're not going back, we're moving forward, right? And so on the other hand, though, change done by us is very often something that we desire, right? So it's something that we want. There's a commitment as opposed to a compliance. And that's a very different energetic state. It's a very different emotional state. And you get a very different level of performance from people when they feel invested and when they're fully committed in the change. And these behaviors often endure, like they stay and they're more sustainable over the long term because you're bought in. And I really want you to think about that is the intention with any type of change activity inside your organization, is to get people bought into the change. That's what everybody's looking to increase. So, as we lead our teams, as we lead ourselves, as we lead our communities and our organizations through change, our goal should always be to seek personal commitment over a forced compliance. Now, I know that there's a situation that we're in right now where we were forced, right? We were forced to comply due to state of emergency orders and all kinds of other things that have been passed down. But I think our goal now, as we move through this situation, is to shift and turn the tides and start implementing changes that will ultimately lead to commitment versus compliance. And so commitment brings out the best in people, right? And that's what we want. Commitment maximizes our chance of success over the long term. And so that has a lot to do with how we communicate things and how do we actually set up change inside of our organization, which I'm going to share with you today. I'm Harriet Schumacher. There was a brief introduction made already, so I won't spend very much time here. I'm a certified executive coach. I teach change management and innovation among many other programs that I facilitate, like Fierce Conversations. My company is Big Leap Leadership. We're based here in Halifax. We've been in operation since 2013. We have trained thousands of leaders across the globe. helping them to become more effective leaders. That's really what we specialize in, is specializing in increasing leadership effectiveness, because leaders ultimately drive the bottom line inside an organization and impact so many areas of an organizational culture and ultimately its performance. So that's what we specialize in. Experience Point and Experience Change is a program that I facilitate that this webinar is really based on. And I also offer a program called Lead Her Ship, which is an executive coaching program specifically for women. So thank you for being here. I'm very excited to get to know all of you. And if there's anything that I'm sharing with you today that you're curious about, please feel free to pop in and ask a question. I know that we're going to be doing a Q&A at the end, so please feel free to send your questions along. We'll be happy to answer them before we're done today. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what happens when we're trying to navigate challenges and navigate change inside our organization, because I think it's helpful before we begin into any of the tactics that I'm going to be sharing with you today, that we really look at the big picture before we dive into change. And when we're faced with the challenge, in our businesses and we have a problem that we need to solve, the problem of solving it and bringing it to a point where it delivers some kind of business benefit or impact is what I like to call the journey, right? So that's the journey from challenge to impact, right? And rarely, as we all know, is that journey short? Is it easy? Is it, a straight line? Especially if we're doing something significant, especially if there's a really big change and a lot of overhaul that we're needing to take. And I think that's exactly where we're at right now. I mean, we're on a journey with this COVID-19, right? Starting from challenge to the place where we can actually recover our economy and be able to really bounce forward and feel like we have a firmly entrenched new normal, right? So early in the journey, we're focused on really trying to understand the problem and to solve it. Maybe we're creating something new, maybe we're innovating, maybe we're just trying to understand, and maybe we're assessing, a range of different types of solutions to try to really figure out, okay, well, how do we solve this problem? How do we take this challenge and what do we do with it? How do we solve it? So we're much more in the red space than in the blue space, right? Initially when we have a challenge. And that said, we really need to align key stakeholders around our new solution. And as you may have experienced yourself, that's often as hard as solving the problem itself, like getting people all on the same page, if you will, right? It's very challenging because we have so many different people, so many different emotions, so many different needs, right? And so as we continue the journey and our solutions become clearer into focus, we start to engage more stakeholders and seek to take our solution and roll it out or scale it throughout the organization. You can see that this is exactly, what is happening in our province, right? With the way in which COVID-19 arrived and how it is starting to evolve, right? And how we are starting to engage the province and businesses in coming up with a solution, right? So I want you to think of this model as a phased approach, and you can really apply it to any change that you're experiencing in your business. And so as we continue, the journey, solution becomes more clear into focus. We start to engage more stakeholders. We start to roll it out. And during this time, solution continues to evolve based on feedback, right? Based on some trial and error, based on some, applying it and experimentation. But the energy shifts towards engaging the people, engaging the organization, or engaging the culture or the community to adopt these new ways of doing things, to essentially become the new normal. The red space, I like to call it the hard stuff. This is a hard problem or a hard challenge. The blue space is often called the soft stuff because this is about people. And the funny thing about this journey is that the soft stuff, the blue stuff, the getting people on board, is the hard stuff. And too often, in my experience, organizations overlook the need to spend time there and implement solutions that traditionally fail. So it's often more difficult than actually trying to solve the problem itself, is getting people on board and ready to implement and ready to engage and really buy into the situation. So I really want you to think about, there's a set of practices, there's a set of skills and behaviors that help us create great solutions, okay? So we need to learn how to do that. And, design thinking, for example, is a great way to do that, which is a program that I facilitate. So really trying to figure out, okay, how do we solve this? Like, what is the right approach? How do we innovate and create something new in order to really be able to solve this challenge? Because difficult situations typically require new approaches, right? And so IDEO is an innovation powerhouse, and that's what this program is based on. And they teach innovation throughout the world. to make ideas ideal, to realize the full potential of those solutions or something new, whether it's a new process, a new product, a new policy, a new change of technology, that requires adoption and change. And that's where the program that I deliver called Experience Change fits in. So these kind of go together hand in hand like a complete solution. And I just wanted to share that too, because a bit about what this conversation today is based upon are these two solutions, experience innovation and experience change. So let's talk about why leading people through change matters. And so let's tackle this kind of question on, head on. Why does this matter? Why do we even need to do this? And I'm going to touch on 4 benefits really of leading people through a change initiative. And you notice I'm saying leading people through, right? Because that's the goal, is to get people to be bought in at the end of change. So 70% of initiatives, most initiatives inside your organization, most strategies, 70% of these initiatives fail. That is just data that has been pulled over and over again. And I'd like you to think about that for the reality of your organization. How many initiatives have you tried to launch and get started, only to find out that they didn't really get to fruition, right? And so 70% of initiatives fail to achieve intended goals. And this is on a cited number from McKinsey, okay? And the vast majority of these initiatives, over 90%, were deemed to have the right solutions, but adoption was the challenge. So of course, failure is expensive. Spending a lot of this time on the front end, coming up with solutions only for it to fail in the back end is really frustrating and quite expensive. And so I want you to think about, what are some of the barriers to success, and how could you start to really proactively address those and start to prioritize some of those as you start thinking about the initiatives and the solutions that you're going to be creating as a result of the response to COVID-19. So you really want to increase the odds of your success, and coming up with the solution in and of itself is one part of the problem, right? It's one part of the approach to change. Then we need to get people to buy in and adopt it and implement it, right? And so a lot of the time, the approach that organizations take around coming up with these solutions, while the ideas are great, they haven't given a lot of thought and planning and preparation as to how do we actually get the organization to buy in to these initiatives and actually execute it and apply it with commitment as opposed to compliance. Okay, another challenge is lack of alignment. And so there can tend to be a lot of lack of executive alignment. And I want you to think about projects that you've been on inside your organization where stakeholders were not bought in, where people were just kind of like, yeah, sitting on the fence or not saying anything at all, or you hadn't done a really good job with assessing how bought in people were, right? So when there's a lack of alignment, that's another reason why a lot of these solutions just don't get off the ground. Decisions are better and faster when people are aligned, engaged, and empowered. And so I really want you to think about, are the people inside your organization on board with the changes you're going to be implementing? And what do you need to do in order to get that done? Because, this really ultimately helps you move faster. And there's a really huge difference in creating the conditions inside of our organizations that allow people to say, I'm fully invested, I'm in, let's get this done together. And, we're hearing from a lot of organizations, from a lot of leaders that we work with right now, that this COVID-19 world, that there's a tremendous sense of urgency plus empowerment to get this done. So leading people through change really ultimately helps everyone to move faster, which is what we want, okay? So the most important details usually can't be planned. And have you ever been witness to a project that checked all the right boxes? It was on time, it was on budget, and from a project management perspective, it was deemed a success, but it made customers or maybe your colleagues or your employees angry. And so, is it really a success? Because I think a lot of the times we can validate internally inside the organization that we think it's a success, but we haven't actually thought about the implementation and the stakeholders who are going to be affected by that change, and they're resistant because we didn't think about them in the first place. So it's important to recognize that relationships really matter. And when we have empathy for customers, when we use a human-centered approach to designing solutions and thinking about what the end users are actually going to want and need, we make better decisions, more informed decisions. And it's not always the decision that they want, but at least it's a considered decision, and people will respect that. So leading people through change ultimately improves customer satisfaction. Finally, everybody wants everyone to just be 100% on board and engaged with all the changes that we want to create in the world. And I would just say that that's just not normal. Change is hard. A lot of us don't like change. And so resistance is natural, but it's not inevitable. And so it's normal. I think it's healthy even to encounter resistance. So healthy to encounter resistance. We can try to anticipate, and we can try to help people through the process, but we're not mind readers. And I think that's really okay. We have to allow some flexibility, right? So involvement plays a really huge role in building support, and showing that you care enough to be clear and concise and careful with your communications goes a long way to building confidence in your leadership. And so leading people through change, when done well, it can increase employee engagement, which is another reason why we really want to take a phased and very thoughtful approach to leading people through change. So I'm going to give you guys a tool right now, which I find extremely helpful when I'm working with teams, really helping them to think through the change that they're currently experiencing. And it's called a force field analysis. And so I'm going to encourage you to grab a pen and a piece of paper and just jot this down. We're going to work through this together, and I'm going to get you to engage with me in the chat to tell me what comes to mind when we start working through this. It's really a powerful tool, super simple. You could use it with your teams. You could take this back inside your organizations, and it helps you to synthesize information and really build a change model and a change strategy from this tool. So I always use this at the beginning, okay? So it's called a force field analysis, really helps plan for action, which is what we are all thinking about, what do we want to do next, okay? So when I say force field, I mean two things. I mean driving forces, what forces are pushing change or encouraging change or helping the change. Can be positive attributes as well, right? So what is pushing us? In the middle, we have status quo, right? Because change is really about undoing status quo. But on the other side of this, we have restraining forces that are barriers, things that are hindering change, things that are holding us back. And so force field analysis really recognizes that situations are maintained by this equilibrium. They are maintained by a status quo. They are between forces that drive change and forces that resist change. So for change to happen, for it to be successful, the driving forces need to exceed the restraining forces. So this is really important. I want you to write that down. For change to be successful, the driving forces need to outweigh or exceed the restraining forces, or you're going to be constantly met with resistance. So resistance is normal, but we do need to counteract it, okay? So we're going to work through this together right now, and I want you to participate in the chat and tell me, as I'm explaining these to you, what are some of the driving forces and restraining forces in your world in relation to change, okay? So we can work through this model together. Okay, so let's first talk about rational things. So I break this into 4 quadrants essentially, okay? So I want you to write down 4 quadrants just as you see here. First, we have rational forces. So, rational driving forces and rational restraining forces. So rational relates to facts, data, and essentially things that are overt and in the open, like market changes, like financial changes. These are just things that exist. They are, out there, and they are data, overt forces, facts, rational forces, okay? And so then we add another layer to this force field, which is our emotional forces. And emotional driving forces and emotional restraining forces, so on both sides of this quadrant here. And these are typically things that you can't see, right? So you feel them, like internal politics, like culture, like people's mindsets. And these are often the boxes that present the biggest challenges and opportunities for change. But I will tell you, most of them get looked over, which is why a lot of these change initiatives fail. So you've heard the phrase like the elephant in the room, and these elephants live in these boxes. Like this is where they hang out, okay? So I'm going to work through this with you right now, and I want you to take a look through each of these boxes, and let's start with box number 1. So tell me, for your either in your world, or if you just want to use what's been going on with COVID, because I just want you to really understand this model so you can take it and apply it back in the real world. So let's take a look at these boxes. So what's been going on for you in quadrant 1, what do you think are some of the rational driving forces that is impacting you, your business, impacting the world that we live in, impacting change for us? So tell me in the chat, what do you think are some of the rational driving forces from your experience? And let's just kind of see what you have to share. And don't worry about getting this perfect, like we're just testing something and learning something new for the first time. So just put your thoughts. What are some of the facts, the rational driving forces that are forcing us to change? Yes. Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, so financial impact for sure. So, well, we aren't making as much money anymore, or we don't have as many customers coming in the door, or we're not operational, right? Borders are closed. Supply chain, absolutely. Yep, right. Yes, right. So, quarantine, being forced to stay home, like that's a fact, right? Uh, Social distancing, fact, right? These are state of emergency, fact, right? Yeah, isolation requirements, absolutely. Yep, okay. Technology, yeah, so having to use technology as a form of communication because we can't actually be physically connected with each other. Yes, you got it, perfect. Okay, so these are things that have been forced on us, right? Also, even things like let's talk about like the government subsidies and payouts, right? So this has been forced on us. Like there's new programs and initiatives that are impacting all kinds of facets of business, right? Where people are receiving like SERP payments and things like that, right? Like these are forcing change where people are maybe worried about, I know there's a lot of people that were worried about coming back to work and so wanted to stay home rather than work in places where business was open, right? So these are some of the things that we're like, whoa, okay, these are forces that are encouraging change and I might need to adapt to that, okay? So let's look at quadrant 2. What are some of the rational restraining forces that are hindering our ability to change? So tell me, what are the things that might be pushing against us? What are some of the restraining forces? And sometimes there can be overlap in both of these boxes, right? So don't worry that just because you answered it in 1, it doesn't necessarily apply to 2. What are some of the things that are pushing against our capacity to be able to evolve and change, either within your business? What are some of the restraining forces from a rational standpoint in box number 2? What might be hindering your ability to change inside your organization? Yep, so financial. Lack of access to technology. Yep, for sure. We may not have technology at our disposal. We may have been not able to sell products online. So you might have been a brick and mortar business and now you have to sell online and you may not have had the capacity to be able to do that. Yep, so lack of understanding of technology. Financial limitations, so we don't have the budgets or we don't have the money to be able to enact change. Absolutely, okay. So let's talk about fear and uncertainty. Where does that live? Does that live in rational or does that live in emotional? What do you think? Even though it might seem rational, right? Fear and uncertainty and worry definitely falls into the emotional side of things, right? Because that's the underlying stuff that people may or may not be talking about. That could be like the elephant in the room, like I'm worried or I'm fearful or I'm unsure about these things. Stress, absolutely, 100%, right? So when you think about quadrant 3, what are some of the emotional the emotional driving or restraining forces in box number 3, everything that you just listed, right? Like people being uncertain, people being stressed, things that they may not necessarily be talking about, right? Things that are going home and, wearing so many hats, right? Like having all of these different layers on your role at home, right? So yes, fear. Also mental health, right? The impacts that we've had on mental health, the psychological pressure that people have been under. Absolutely, right? So all of those things are definitely restraining forces that are holding people back from change. Yes, they can be, Rod. They can both be drivers and restrainers at the same time, right? So I like to look at fear as can be a fuel. So fear can be a reason why. It can be the burning platform as to why change is necessary. Because if we, just vote for status quo because of fear, the thing that we're most afraid of is pretty much likely to happen by not taking action, by being resistant to change. So we definitely want to maybe play both of those sides when we're talking about our communication plan in relation to change. So I'm happy that you picked up on that. Yeah, absolutely, it can be. They can be at odds with each other, right? So it's kind of like both sides of the same coin, for sure. So, okay, so this is great job, guys. I wanted to share this model with you. I would encourage you to take this and use it inside your organization and use it as a way to facilitate a team conversation about what's currently going on right now. Because, why force field is so great is it uncovers how you need to communicate and what you need to be paying attention to from an action plan perspective. And so it's a very simple model, but has a lot of impact when used correctly. And so if you look at it from a communication standpoint, and remember those rational driving forces, right? Market shifting, poor financial performance, lack of, we don't know how customers are going to respond and what their needs are going to be, right? And just people's perceptions around doing business in the future and what they're going to expect in order to trust business moving forward. Like trust, I think, is a really emotional component in there, right? And so I think all of these identify the primary reasons why status quo is not an option to survive, right? So in other words, rational driving forces help us answer the question, why do we need to change? They tell us why, okay? And which we can build into our communication plan. It also helps us understand why status quo is no longer an option, because all of these things are happening, whether we like it or not, which requires us to change, okay? And for the action planning part, when you think about how do I take this information on the force field, and then what do we focus on? How do we prioritize when it feels like there's so many things that we need to be focused on? Most of us tend to naturally focus our energy on dialing up the driving forces. And that is important to do that. But what's far more effective, and I find often neglected, is focusing on the restraining forces and seeking to minimize them, okay? So I want you to identify the top barriers to change, prioritize them, and then build plans to mitigate each of those. We typically go at this outside in. I want you to go inside out, if that makes sense, okay? In terms of thinking about what are these emotional and restraining forces that are going to get in our way, that are going to be a barrier that we need to prioritize and decide how are we going to overcome those when we think about really trying to increase buy-in and get action. So force field, super simple tool, can be used at any stage of a project, any stage of a change initiative. And it takes about 20 minutes to work on with a team and really can generate some really powerful insight. And I find it's a really healthy buy-in tool because it gets people talking, right? It gets all of these emotions and fears and elephants in the room out into the room so that we can discuss it and we can have a healthy conversation. Because I find that a lot of times, because the emotional stuff is so challenging and so unknown, a lot of organizations skip past it, and you're doing yourself a huge disservice by ignoring that those things exist, like pretending that they don't exist, rather than just talking about them head on and figuring out, okay, well, now that we know these things, what are we going to do about it? Given that these exist, what do we do about it if we want change to be successful? So, leading change, I want to give you a bit of a model here, which is what I'm going to share with you for the last bit of time, just provide a change management model for you. But change really is, it's a collection of tools. There's lots of different change models out there. I think you should just pick a model and go with one. I prefer Kurt Lewin's change model, but I think you should just pick one. Really, you need a lot of tools at your disposal in order to be able to manage a change strategy effectively. You need techniques, you need mindsets to really ensure that people are ready to change. People are willing to commit and they're ready to engage and they are able to do what it takes. So I want you to think about how ready, willing, and able are we? Because that will really dictate whether or not you're going to be successful with whatever change initiative it is that you're wanting to implement inside your organization. And so if someone's not willing, and I like to do like a diagnostic when I look at key stakeholders in a change management strategy, I'll do some stakeholder mapping and really look at, okay, let's name all the players that we have here. Where are they at in terms of their readiness, their willingness, and their ability to change? So that, because not everybody's going to be in the same place in relation to this, right? So, and also, how are you? If you're the leader of this change initiative, where are you at? What help and support and resources do you need, right? So if someone's not willing, you might hear them say something like, I won't, Like, I'm not doing this. You can't make me, right? Or I don't care, like whatever, like apathy means, usually cues for a lack of willingness. If someone's not able, they'll say things like they lack skills, they lack knowledge, they don't know how to do it, right? So they need training. They may not know how to operate in the new world. And you might hear them say, well, I don't know how, or tell me what to do, which is a sign that they need some support, they need some training. So they might be willing, they just might not feel necessarily able. And so they'll say things like, I can't, or I don't know, is another way to look at that. And if someone is not ready, means they do not have the capacity to change. And so they might be like, well, why? Why now? Or not now is what you might hear from them. And so I want you to just start thinking about, if you've got a team of people and you're really trying to help them get bought into change, because that's ultimately what's going to make you succeed or fail in relation to the change that your business needs to go under. And when I say your people, I also mean your customers. I don't want you to just thinking about what needs to happen internally. I want you to think about building your change management strategy to be able to enlist your customers in that change with you so that they stay loyal and they stay bought into your business. So, the journey from, challenge to impact is never linear. We expect it to be. We look at, the horizon and we're like, okay, we're just going to implement these changes and then we're all going to ride off into the sunset together. And rarely does that happen. When you think about this, a desire to change, a desire to improve performance, like improving customer experience, or, rebuilding our businesses, or developing new capabilities or new efficiencies. At a given point in time, we undertake a challenge, and what do we expect performance to do? We expect it to go up, right? We don't expect it to go flat. We're like, okay, we're making all these changes and we're adapting our businesses and we're implementing all these new regulations and we're getting ready to reopen on the 5th of June, and we expect things to just carry off into the sunset. That's not what happens. That's our expectation. What actually happens is this. So I really want to be honest with all of you, is that this change process is going to be challenging, especially if you have other people involved. So I want you to prepare for this dip. And that's actually what we call it the dip. And the dip takes place because of the disruption in what we're doing today that requires people to adapt to a new way of doing things. So how many of you may have noticed this dip in your teams already as a result of responding to COVID? I'm just curious. Like, you were like, okay, we're all going home, everything's changing, we're all going to go home and work. And so we expected like things would just kind of like follow a straight line and we would just move in that straight direction that we were working in previously. How many of you actually noticed a dip in performance, either for yourself or for others? It's very common. And I want you to just think about the goal here. It really is to not avoid the dip, but to recognize that it exists. And so I want you to think about this as well. As if your business is reopening on June 5th, you can anticipate that there's probably going to be another dip, or maybe a few more dips along this journey as we're starting to navigate this change. So I'm going to share this with you. And I want you to think about the different phases, the emotional phases of going through change. And as I write these down for you, I really want you to think about the people on your team. Where are they at in their emotional experience of processing change? Because we all move through this cycle from feeling, denial. Like, how many of you felt denial when this whole COVID stuff happened? You were like, emotionally, like, I can't believe this is happening. Like, this isn't going to last. Like, what is this? We were just in denial that this was really real. Then to resistance. So digging our heels in and not wanting to change. Then to disorientation, which is essentially accepting that it's here, but being confused and not necessarily knowing what to do. Then getting to the place like, okay, well, I guess we're here to stay. I guess this isn't going away. So I'm going to start to apply this change. I'm going to start to experiment, but I'm probably going to make a lot of mistakes because I don't really know what I'm doing. Like, I'm doing something different. Getting to the place where you have full commitment, and that's coming out of this at the other side. So I like to use this model really to help you think about mapping everybody on your team right now, including yourself. Where are you at? If you look at their behavior, you look at how they're showing up, you look at the conversations that you've been having, where do you think people live on this spectrum right now? You could probably put people's faces, right? And so the goal for us as leaders of change is to help people move through this process fairly quickly, but recognizing that we all have different phases. Some people have a hard time making the graduation over to experiment. They stay in denial and resistance longer than we want them to, right? And so our tools, our strategies, our mindset, and our reflexes really dictate how quickly we move through that process. So I just wanted to share with you, expect this. This is a normal reaction to change. And this is the emotional stuff that's harder for us to really deal with. So I just want to say, the goal here is not to make the dip go away. The goal here is to just make yourself move through it faster. And so leaders who are really effective at change, they know what to do. They have a model. They've got tools that they apply inside their organization to help them mitigate this impact. And they know how to be as leaders. Like, they know how to show up, how to navigate the conversations that they need to have, so that we can ultimately moderate the impact that this dip is going to have in our business earlier and more often, knowing that this is just a normal aspect of change. It's going to show up. So the last thing I'm going to share here with you today, before we move into Q&A, and as always, I have so much information to share with you, so I want to make sure that I give you lots of time to be able to ask questions, is a change management model. And so feel free to take a photo of this if you'd like. This is the model that I actually teach when I'm working with teams, and teach them how to build a strategy around this organizational change model. And you can see that there are several different steps along this model, from coming up with a solution and figuring out, what do we need to do here? What is the change? All the way to the place where we apply this change inside an organization. And it starts with, first, aligning key stakeholders. And I think the 3 steps here really are, first, understand. I think a lot of us skip through this step. So we jump into solution far too quickly without spending the time at the front end really understanding, like, what are we changing? Why is change necessary? What needs to change? Really getting at the root as opposed to the symptoms. A lot of teams react to symptoms as opposed to really understanding what are the root issues that exist within our team, our culture, our business, and how do we begin to change those. So then we were going to figure out, okay, well, who's on our change team? We're going to enlist people to support us. Now that we understand why we need to change, what needs to change, we're going to build a core change team. The third step is creating a vision, and really understanding what is the vision that we need to align the organization around, and how do we then begin to apply that vision to the organization to get them bought in and helping us with the implementation. So these 3 steps really happen before you start to execute anything, right? It's really your preparation and your pre-work, so that you can make sure that you have a higher significant chance of being able to be effective with applying your change. The second phase of this is when you start to enlist the organization. And so motivation really is about burning platform. It's really where you let the organization know that change is coming. Like, status quo is no longer an option, and here's why. And so you're trying to motivate your organization around that and help them understand why it matters to them, like the what's in it for me. Then we're going to build a robust communication plan, which is going to support, what are the phases, what are the steps, what's going on in terms of what they can expect. There's a lot of pieces and a lot of tools that I have available to help you build a really robust communication plan. Then we're going to start to act, right? So that's where we're going to apply training. That's where we're going to start our experimentation. That's where we're going to start some of our trial and error, just to see, okay, well, now that we've got all of this pre-work done, we start applying it. We're responding, we're testing, we're learning, we're taking our prototypes and we're kind of putting them out there and modifying things as we're learning and growing, to the point where we can then consolidate change and say, how did we do? This has become our new normal. This is how we operate now, right? We've got a really good plan. We feel like it's getting us the results that we want. Now we have full commitment and buy-in. The organization realizes that this is who we are now, and our customers know that this is who we are now. So I'd be curious to hear from you when you look at this model and you think about how you've been dealing with change inside your organization. Which of these steps do you think that you've been effective at? Like, where are you at? I guess I want you to kind of assess this right now. And maybe I'll just go back. Sorry, I'll just go back to the whole visual here. Where are you at on this model? When you think about the impact that COVID has had on your business, where are you strong? Where are you weak? What have you done? What have you not done? Right? So just kind of use this as an opportunity to assess, because these steps happen in this order intentionally. A lot of organizations do them in a different order, and that leads to a lot of chaos, to be honest. And so thinking about, what does this model look like for you, and how could you begin to apply this? Where are you strong? Where are you weak? What have you done? What have you not done? Okay. And knowing that this takes time, like this is not a 2-week process, right? This takes quite a bit of period in time, but you should also have some timelines and milestones associated with each of these phases, to really think about what's it going to take for us to get from understanding to consolidation, given, what our situation is. Okay. So imagine like an 18-month, 2-year plan, really and truly, in a lot of instances. Okay. All right. So I see some questions. Yes. Okay. We'll save those questions, and I will be sure to answer them, I promise. So I just wanted to talk, last thing I'm going to say here, and then I will stop talking and we'll take some questions, is really, I want you to think about being an effective leader of change. And, effective leaders of change really know, what to do. So they do the right things at the right time, done well. And so you really know about the tasks. You have models that you use from a change perspective, and you have tools that you can use rather than just winging it, kind of hoping for the best, right? They also know how to be. And so that really is your mindset. That is thinking about taking a human-centered approach to any changes that you're designing, because ultimately humans are going to be the end users of whatever you're creating, right? Really focused on how do you learn and how do you evolve and how do you adapt, and really being purposeful and intentional about the actions that you're taking, because you really understand why change is necessary for you and for others. And so really focused on building relationships. And so both of these things need to happen in order for a change to really be effective inside any organization. Okay. So I want you to think about that. What have your decisions been like? What kind of decisions have you been making? And how were you? How was your decision process? How have you been showing up in the midst of this change? So what have you been doing, and how have you been being, if you will? Okay. So thinking about reflecting on that for yourself as a change agent, as a leader of change. Okay. So I'm going to pause here. I'll leave this model up, and maybe what we'll do is we'll open up the floor to some questions now. Margaret, are you going to help me with that, I think? Yeah. Okay.
Yep,
Awesome.
that sounds great. Yeah.
Great.
So we can have questions come in either in the Q&A or in the chat panel, which we've been using, which is great. And just before we jump in, Harriet, I want to thank you for sharing such really tactical and great suggestions for us, and to kind of engage us in the process. And we've all been scribbling madly trying to consolidate our thoughts. So why don't we go backwards here? So Logan's got a question here. Yeah.
So, okay, Logan has a question in the chat. Okay. So we are all in ACT.
So maybe from that position where you're at, Logan, in that ACT and planning for the future, you're in understand. So Harriet, I wonder if maybe you could help with how do you get to the next step? How do you get from understand to enlist? How you get from ACT to consolidate?
Yeah, so I would say regardless of where you are at in this model right now, so if you say, okay, I think we've jumped in, 2 feet in, and we just started acting straight away. I mean, that's normal. This was change that was done to us, remember, right? So this wasn't change done by us. Now we're at the point where we need to recognize that this needs to be change done by us. We are going to have to come up with the solutions here. So that gives us an opportunity to go back to the beginning and say we need to spend some really good time in the understanding phase, which that force field analysis tool is how I like to dig into understanding. So I would encourage you to take that tool back to your teams, back to your organization, or just with yourself, and spend some time really applying that to your change and really understand, like, why are we changing? What is changing? What at the root of our business model or the root of our culture do we really need to change? When you look at those emotional factors, those are the things you really want to pay attention to as you're building and understanding. Why is change necessary for us? Is it because, we have a lot of people inside our organization who are very uncertain and very fearful. And if we don't get them to a place of feeling comfortable, we know that this is going to be a much longer journey than it needs to be. And so I would spend time there before you act. So it's very common that most people run into reaction mode. So going back to aligning key stakeholders is being proactive, right? It's spending that strategic thinking time up front before we act, so that we're not constantly on this hamster wheel of like start, stop, which is exhausting. Like that's where burnout really tends to come from. So
yeah, and that investment in that prep work is, so it sounds like it really ends up paying off.
It
On
really
the,
does. It's
yeah, on that emotional question,
Mhm.
Patty's got a question here. She says she has a team member who is resistant to returning to work, citing fear of passing the virus to her ill mother.
Mm.
Or their ill mother, the team member. Patty's unsure how to encourage this person, him, to, and she's feeling a bit frustrated. So obviously there's
Mm.
a team member facing some fears. What would you suggest?
Yeah. I mean, that's a tough one. I mean, I would say that that's probably, if you look at that feeling, the dip that we kind of talked about, that emotional piece of change, they're probably within resistance, right? And so really thinking like, I can't or I won't. And so I would have a conversation with them, really open conversation about, um, you know, what you need. Obviously this is an employee. Are they prepared? What would be the conditions that they would need to have in place in order for them to feel safe coming back to work? Because it's not just at work where you could pick up the virus. There's all kinds of other places where you could as well. So it's really a societal issue, not necessarily just a workplace issue, but there could be some things they really need to hear from you about what your guarantee is, or you can't really place a guarantee, but what you're prepared to do in order to be able to support them to come back to work. And ultimately, I think, Patty, that person's going to decide. There's only so much that we can do in that situation. If their
Yeah.
family and that health is their priority, then
But a
that's
real conversation sounds like the
real
first.
conversation. Absolutely. Yeah.
Another question from Judith.
Sure.
She said, great suggestions, first of all. And she also wondered if she could get a copy of your presentation. But her question
Unfortunately, no.
okay.
Sorry, I
Okay.
can't. Yes.
But Judith's question is, what do you
Mhm.
see as the biggest block to communicating change to employees?
Ooh. Well, first of all, so what's the biggest block? I think lack of transparency, 100% of the time. I feel like a lot of folks, we'll just put it out there, a lot of folks have a tendency to not want to communicate anything until everything's been figured out. And you see that happening. We're kind of like on a need to know basis. The challenge with that is that people are going to make up their own stories, whether you're communicating or not. And that's always happening. People will fill in the gaps and they'll make up stories, and those stories will typically be negative and fear-based. And so
Mm-hmm.
my advice as a fierce conversations master trainer for a very long period of time, you want to be authentic and you want to be transparent with what you do know and what you don't know, as opposed to waiting to communicate until you have all your ducks in a row. I also feel like a lot of leaders communicate one way instead of two ways. So this is about both parties being able to communicate with each other openly and honestly. And so if you can have a good intention and really want to understand, as opposed to dictating what needs to happen, then I think you'll have a far better, more robust and successful communication with the people that matter most to your success and happiness ultimately.
And
Yeah.
Harriet, looking through the chat, there's lots of people struggling with communication, how to craft communication to their employees, their board, the public.
Yes.
So, I think talking about this is really, really helpful to give people some tools there. Quick
Yeah.
question here from Carolyn. She said she missed the name of the author of the change model that you like. What was the name of the model?
Yeah. Kurt, and I can type it into the chat. Kurt, Kurt.
Mm-hmm.
And Lewin.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Really, I like him because he does a very good job of balancing the rational and the emotional. And that only went to panelists, sorry. All panelists and attendees. Sorry, I'm going to keep that information on a need to know basis just as I say that, right? So Kurt Lewin is somebody who's really great. And if you want to know more about communication and how to communicate, or you want to learn more about how to change, please reach out, get in touch. I have lots of resources at my disposal. My company, we offer change management training for leaders. We offer fierce conversations training for leaders, even how to communicate from a distance. So we offer all of this online and virtually, even though we used to be an in-person training company. We've adapted and changed our model too. So feel free to reach out if you're looking for more support. Yeah, we're all in it. Yeah, we're all
That's
in it.
right.
All
Another question that we had, and I think a lot of people have probably heard it either themselves or through the grapevine, was how you manage employees who don't want to come back because of the CERB. So again, is that a conversation like the difficult one we were talking about earlier?
For
Or not
sure.
difficult, but frank.
I mean, yeah, I mean, we're in a bit of a sticky situation. You know, I've been talking with a lot of different people about that because it's a very complex issue. It's a complex issue because we have people who are making more money from that than they were when they were working full time. That's a bigger issue that we need to have a conversation about. Like, why is it a bigger incentive for me to stay home than it is to go to work? So, you know, talking about how we pay and what our rewards and benefits are, I think is something that all employers really need to look at. And, you know, wanting to stay home because, you know, CERB's not going to be there forever.
Hmm.
So it's really about having a bigger conversation about, you know, if you're needing people to come back to work right now and they're not prepared to, perhaps you need to be honest with them and let them know that there are people who are prepared to come back to work now and you need to have your business thrive. So I know firsthand there's lots of leaders who are really having to have those kind of tough conversations. I hear you, and I have a business to run. So, you know, here's kind of where we're at right now. Would love you to stay, would love you to come back, but you can't force anybody, right? That's the situation that we're really in.
Yeah.
So, you know, put all your cards out, lay it all out, and ultimately they're going to decide. And then with that information, you need to decide what your next step is going to be. Yeah.
You know, hindsight is always wonderful, but like we can look back and evaluate how things went in reverse. But when you're looking forward, you don't always have all of the pieces of information. So just in the last couple of minutes we have here, as people, you know, running businesses, making decisions, maybe not with the full set of information, what's your top tip for people to make decisions and start to understand where they're going without access to, like, there's so much uncertainty?
Yeah, there is. You know, I think for me, uncertainty it's real, but it's also a mindset. And so I really want to say this. Was the world any more certain a year ago? If we look at it from a business perspective, right? There's going to be more changes that are going to come in our future. There's going to be more difficult situations that we're going to encounter. And so the best thing that you can do right now is to accept that this volatile, this, you know, uncertain, this complex and ambiguous world that we are in is the new normal. And so really learning to be the kind of leader who understands that this is the world I'm in. This is what it's like to run a business today. There are certain things that you can do to make yourself feel more certain, like involving in the key stakeholders, involving in multiple perspectives to help you make the best decisions possible. I wouldn't encourage anybody to be making decisions alone and in a vacuum right now, because the answers are out there, or at least perspective can help shape your thinking and allow you to really make the best decision for right now, knowing that that decision might have to change, right? Which is why change models exist. So yeah, and I think that's just about kind of rolling with it. So being vulnerable, being open, and taking imperfect action is really, really essential right now. Those who are getting ahead of the game here from a business place really were taking imperfect action and weren't sitting back in fear, like, oh, things are so uncertain, so I shouldn't do any action. They were jumping and diving straight in, and they're going to come out of this on the other side, I think, far stronger than those that are kind of hesitating because of uncertainty. Uncertainty is the new normal.
Yeah. Carolyn said it really nicely in the chat here. She said, embrace the new abnormal.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm hearing that, you know, it's flexibility as well, and ability to pivot. I know we all say that too much these days, but that flexibility, that ability to change, that's great.
Sarah, and I would say have conversation. Conversation is where all the work is done. So the more you can have conversation out of your head and with other people, the you know, further along you'll get. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. I just, we have a commitment at the Chamber to start things on time and end things on time. And
I love
we're here
that.
at 10:59. So I will just mention Sarah's comment here. She talked about one of the webinars that we had with McGinnis Cooper as a speaker. And so just from a different perspective about people coming back to work with legal information. And all of our webinar information is available. The recordings are available on our site. So we'll wrap it up there. I really want to thank you, Harriet, for answering our questions and giving us so much insight into handling change successfully. And I really want to thank all of you for taking the time out of your day to log in and join us today. It's fantastic to have our members taking part like this. We are hosting webinars every week with experts in financial planning, scenario planning, and how to effectively reopen your business. So you can go to halifaxchamber.com/events for a full lineup, and the recordings are also available there. This recording today's webinar was recorded and will be available to all attendees shortly. So we'll send out a link to that following up on the email. So thanks again for joining us, and have a great rest of your day and a beautiful weekend. Thanks, Harriet.
Lovely. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.